After this video, you are definitely going to despise caves on Spring 22 and 1959. The gathering was eager to investigate Pete's sinkhole. They intend to look at another section about a portion of a mile from the cavern entrance. This entry had been found only 14 days sooner, so cavers from everywhere the UK were anxious to see what was inside. They began slithering through tight passages around 1000 FD, underneath the ground. After about an hour they came to a major opening. It was a tremendous chamber that no one had named at this point. The chamber was unbelievably lovely, and the gathering halted to respect it. They additionally found a tight shaft that had been found before. It seemed to be an opening in the ground, with bunches of opportunities for where it could lead. They knew that the limited shaft turned and represented a test. They had likewise determined that the shaft's profundity was around 40 ft. They chose to bring down a 75 FD stepping stool into the opening in the event the shaft broadened further, and afterward it was the ideal opportunity for one of them to go down. However, who might it be? Despite the fact that Neil was 6 ft tall, he was exceptionally thin and courageously concluded that he would be quick to dive the shaft. The shaft shifted off vertical for 12 FD, wound, firmly slanted 10 FD, and afterward dropped upward for 18 FD. Gradually and definitely worked his direction down the shaft, and when he was around 40 feet down, he saw a few little stones impeding his direction. This piece of the shaft was extremely restricted, tight and claustrophobic. To kick the stones, Neil needed to move his body into an abnormal position. While doing this, he inadvertently stuck the stepping stool underneath him. He was currently sandwiched between the shaft, yet again, wall and the stepping stool, unfit to move. He was trapped in obscurity and incapable to free himself. After close to 30 minutes of battle, Neil abandoned attempting to free himself. He yelled up to the others, "I say, I'm stuck. I can't move an inch." He then requested that the others lift the stepping stool. As he hung on, which they did, they effectively moved him a couple inches. However, the stepping stool got stuck, and they needed to have a go at something different. There was no frenzy as of now. The cavers above started the standard salvage activity and brought down a rope into the shaft. In Neil's mind, he'd be free in the blink of an eye. The gathering let the rope down and Neil tied it around his body. The cavers then, at that point, pulled the rope. However, the shaft had sharp corners and snapped a couple of moments later. They chose to attempt this once more and again let an alternate rope down the shaft. They figured out how to pull Neil up around 2 FD before the rope snapped. Neil was as yet stuck now, overreacting. A portion of the cavers went to find support inside the space of hours. Volunteers from everywhere Britain showed up at Pinnacle Cave to help free the caught caver. The RAF police, and surprisingly, the naval force appeared too. Yet a couple of hours after Neil became caught, the heroes dealt with one more issue they hadn't pondered. Neil was immovably stuck. Removing the little air course, there was this caused risky degrees of carbon monoxide from Neil's breath, bringing about noxious air. Neil began blacking out, inquiring as to whether the heroes needed to go out and eat. It was clear they didn't have a lot of time. Experienced cavers was sent down the shaft in order to reach Neil Greenery. However, individually, one, they were driven back by the putrid air, a significant number of them in any event. Passing out, one worker by the name of Ron Peters had the option to arrive at Neil. The whole rope was around him, yet this hindered his breathing much more, so he needed to withdraw the rope, and return oxygen tanks were shipped off Castleton, and the specialists siphoned oxygen down through a cylinder, yet they were as yet unfit to free him, and there was simply no time left. Heroes were frantic to arrive at Neil. The arrangement was on the off chance that anybody had the option to reach him and endure the air to break his collarbone so he could be liberated, yet nobody had the option to. They even sent in one of Britain's most adored and experienced cavers, effervescent. However, he was unable to help. Unfortunately, during the morning of the second day, Dr. John Carter, observing his Breathing articulated Neil Greenery dead on the 24th of walk 1959. Any reasonable person would have agreed heroes did all they could to save Neil Greenery, and all of them were totally destroyed by the result, including Neil's dad, who held up external the cavern. All through the salvage activity, in the event that you are claustrophobic, this story will make you uncomfortable. John, a clinical understudy at the College of Virginia, went on a cavern explore, an excursion with his sibling Josh, and a gathering of loved ones, regardless of Jay's insight as a cavalry. Having investigated many caverns in Utah during his childhood, he ended up in a hazardous circumstance, a Nutty Clay Cave, known for its troublesome territory. John and his sibling Josh chose to investigate additional difficult passages. With two companions, they had caught wind of the birth channel and took a gander at the guide to find it. This section was long and restricted, with a difficult situation toward the end. Past the tightest part, there was a little room where they could tolerate upping and pivot. They realized the birth trench would be tight and could cause frenzy in any event. For experienced cavers, they split up to look for this particular passage. John and Josh took the entry on the left, traveling through a little passage. For around 15 FD, it undulated all over in a few elevati. Over the course of the following 10 ft, there were offshoots of rocks and difficult situations that required a caver to curve their body in a few directions to get shoulders past, then hips, lastly winding legs, so they twist in the legitimate bearing. It was anything but a question of basically getting your body powerfully through a tight opening. This region was known as the wine tool on the grounds that the rare sorts of people who had experienced it were little and adaptable, utilizing every one of their abilities to move gradually through the frenzy-prompting reshapings after the wine tool region. The section calculated up for one more 5 FD or so, then turned on over a stone edge with a sharp 90 curve to one side. As of not long ago, cavers had utilized this little region after the wine tool to direct back toward themselves if necessary. John didn't know it yet. No other person had at any point gotten over this edge before he was in totally uncharted area, regardless of being in a very close and awkward position. Johann stayed calm and composed. He was sure that there would be an opening ahead. From the start he assumed he was in some piece of the birth channel, where numerous cavers had felt stuck in the tightening burrow, yet turned out to be fine and dandy. Once they arrived at the opposite side, once he went through a tight zone, he began to slide toward the lower part of this passage. He was close to L, doing a handstand, attempting to hold his body up and sort out some way to push in reverse. He actually couldn't flip around, and presently gravity was pulling his 200 lb body against the blurring strength of his arms. He hollered out to his sibling Josh and told him not to follow him, however, to return out. They examined his choices and concluded that pushing ahead to attempt to pivot was the smartest thought. He was falling onto his shoulders and head right now, and expected to take action to escape this upward position. His headlamp provided him with a brief look at an opening in the floor ahead, which could prompt a bigger space. He felt somewhat more confident now, feeling that they would be chuckling about this misfortune over Thanksgiving supper. He made the slight turn and headed towards the opening. John had wound up in a little opening in the lower part of this passage, which was outlandishly tight. Only 18 in by 10 in, not a lot greater than the screen of a PC, ended up wedged almost totally topsy-turvy. At a 70 point he had invested some energy, attempting to propel himself back upwards out of this opening. It was depleting. His arms were stuck in a futile position. One collapsed under his chest, and the other caught on a stone somewhere around his side. He stressed against the walls and immediately understood that every one of his endeavors wouldn't move him back up to the shallow passage. He began hollering for Josh again. His sibling realized that he was attempting to pivot, so his shouts were not a decent sign. Josh advanced once more into the restricted space. He could see the finish of his sibling's leg standing out of the stone, as though it had gulped down him. he attempted to hold and pull up, while J.N. pushed from his end. After a few useless endeavors, they were both inclination depleted and, disappointed, Josh could see that this was intense, and they would require proficient assistance to get him out. Whenever help had shown up, it was currently 12:30 in the first part of the day, and Josh had been too side-turvy for 3 hours. They tied webbing lashes around his legs, and afterward took care of it back to it. The pit, where the passage began, a few endeavors were made to pull on the ropes. There was simply an excess of erosion on the ropes to make any viable delivery on J.N. During this time, cavers were attempting to chat with J.N., console him, and offer stories to keep him quiet and talking. John had gone through the night topsy-turvy and was giving indications of the actual constraints of the body. To endure this position, the human body was not made to be topsy-turvy for long. It was at that point over 12 hours. The cerebrum was not worked to endure this sort of liquid strain. Liquids were developing in his lungs, and poisons was beginning to collect from the absence of legitimate dissemination. His organs were pushing on his lungs, and every breath was a debilitating exertion, for muscles not worked for such work. His breathing was easing back after many bomb endeavors. The salvage group accumulated in the pit region inside the cavern and examined the circumstance. It was resolved that a clinical expert would have to affirm that he had really passed out. Paramedic was sent into the tight segment to affirm what was thought at 11:56 on Wednesday, November 25. The John Jones was articulated dead. The salvage groups labored for 24 hours in a row to attempt to free J.N., yet it was simply impractical with his topsy-turvy position. Joan endured an exceptional 27 hours in a modified position, which is quite a bit longer than whatever was anticipated as conceivable. Kenny Oceanside is somebody I've discussed previously, yet his story is maybe one of the most chilling stories having to do with caves. Kenny was a YouTuber and caver who vanished in 2014 in the wake of endeavoring to investigate a cavern he nicknamed the EM Cavern, which he revealed hearing uncommon commotions from and saw as dubious as it was found 6 mi south of a highly confidential airbase. As he entered the cavern, he guaranteed his entire body started to vibrate. The more he went into the cavern, the more awful the vibrating became. He said he out of nowhere turned out to be extremely apprehensive and gotten a move on out of there. He transferred this video to discuss his involvement in the cavern during one of my climbs out by Nellis Flying Corps Base. I found a secret cavern. The entry to the cavern was formed like a amazing capital M. I generally enter each cavern I find, however, as I entered this specific cavern, my entire body started to vibrate. Anything it was that Kenny was feeling appeared to be coming from inside the cavern. The nearer I got to the cavern entrance, the more awful the vibrating turned out to be. Out of nowhere, I turned out to be exceptionally frightened, and height followed it out of there. That was quite possibly of the weirdest thing that always happened to me. Obviously, the web being what it is, individuals ridiculed him and blamed him for making the entire thing up, or if nothing else, manufacturing the story. Fundamentally, Kenny was constrained into returning to the cavern a subsequent time, despite the fact that he was reluctant to enter it. Whenever Kenny first surrendered to the strain and got back to the cavern, and he has not been seen since his telephone was tracked down in a neglected mine entry, yet no one was at any point found. Kenny was a very quite affable person, causing his vanishing far-fetched passing every one of the more lamentable individuals to accept that, given the closeness to the airbase, Kenny was really killed by the public authority defenders of this hypothesis, except that the M cavern Kenny found was an entry to some sort of highly classified government office because of its closeness to Nellis Flying Corps Base in Region 51. They accepted that the vibrating sensation Kenny felt while close to the cavern was a guard system to hold regular people back from entering. Under a similar hypothesis, Kenny saw government insider facts inside the cavern and was grabbed by US fighters when he arose a YouTuber by the name of Deserted Personalities 11 posted a video of what he accepts to be the MK that Kenny portrayed, and it's pretty. Sound. The cavern seems to have been walled off and fixed for stalling access inside. Okay. I made it up here to the entry of this cavern. There's the one side of it descends and afterward returns up there and down now. This doesn't appear to be exceptionally profound by any means, and it seems as though they were attempting to wall it off. There's stacked shakes not too far off, as well as behind me here, like not too far off. The YouTuber finds various things on the floor, like boards of wood and a brew bottle with no name, potentially a container. Kenny was conveying most. Curiously, he finds a Region 51 admonition sign, which really may back up the hypotheses that this was some sort of access to an underground office claimed by the public authority. Yet this is all hypothesis, and what truly befell Kenny is as yet unclear. The Bushman got sinkhole is a characteristic sinkhole on the Mount Carmel Ranch, previously found in 1977 by novice jumper Mike Rathborn. The cavern is totally loaded up with new water accepted to be north of 3 million years of age, frequently canvassed in a green layer of duckweed. It has a profundity of around 283 m, setting it as one of the most profound freshwater collapses in the world. To enter the cavern, you should descend a lofty stone to the water surface. This entry is limited, however you could perceive, from the start around 20 m from the surface. The cavern before long opens up into an unlimited principal chamber that stretches past what the eye can see. The cavern is pitch dark, so dark that any kind of light you endeavor to utilize is gulped by the haziness. DeAndrea was a South African jumper who might casually partake in a little north of 200, makes a plunge his vocation. By 1994, a thrill seeker with a preference for investigation, Dreer was driven by the tales of jumpers before him not set in stone to keep on becoming famous. On December 17, 1994, Dreer and his kindred plunge mates left on a training plunge inside Bushman's lobby. Nuno Gomez had gathered a group and laid out conditions for a specialized profound jump planned for later on in the week. The whole group slipped into the Noah water and investigated the region prior to reconvening and taking a head count. The main issue, Dion was no more. The group endlessly looked for him, however, at last needed to get back to the surface to keep up with their own well-being. The 20-year-old Dion Dreer was gone. The group had since all concurred that they accepted Dion disappeared on his rising at around 50 m from the surface. The settled upon agreement for his evaporating probably had to do with a deficiency of cognizance or hypercapnia brought about by the high work pace of breathing at that low of a profundity. 14 days passed, and Dreer was assumed dead. His dad Theo employed a remotely worked submarine utilized by the Debers mining organization to attempt to aid the recuperation while the submarine was down beneath. They tracked down a lot of nothing for a long while, until at last it ran over something they had not seen before. It was Dreer's plunge protective cap on the cavern floor. His body, anyway, was all the while missing, which takes us back to October 28, the 2004 892 FD. Underneath superficial, David John Shaw was an Australian scuba jumper, specialized jumper, a carrier pilot for Cathay Pacific, a man of numerous gifts. Shaw wound up increasingly more attracted to profound jumping as he progressed in years. What he didn't expect on this jump was finding the scandalous Dion Fryer. Shaw found his wetsuit and an assortment of bones inside. He attempted to move the body, yet it was implanted in the sediment. After a couple of additional endeavors, he understood that he, at the end of the day, needed more oxygen left to proceed with this. He got back to the surface everlastingly different by what he saw his old buddy wear. Shirley says that Shay almost turned into a man had after this experience. He considered it to a greater extent a mission to really his errand, to bring this body back, unquestionably expressed. The two companions got into contact with DeAndrea's folks, telling them of Shah C. A disclosure Shah made a guarantee to the Dreers, promising that he planned to recover their child's body. Throughout the following 3 weeks, Shaw and Shirley started to design out the recuperation plan they selected. A group of prepared help jumpers to support the mission. Their positions were to plunge into the water in stretches to keep an eye on Shea at different profundities, while he came up Shaw's arrangement was easy. To send many individuals over the surface, find Dreer's carcass, load it into a body pack, and return to the surface. What could turn out badly. On January 8, 2005, Shaw, Shirley, and the remainder of the group showed up at the sinkhole at around 6 a.m. As yet completely dark external in the freezing winter air, the group unfolded their stuff and ready for the mission. Shaw arranged a submerged camera to his individual to assist with reporting the occasion. In just shy of 10 minutes, Shaw had dropped around 270 ft beneath the surface. Moving the carcass, he arranged the body I-tag and started to attempt to fit the cadaver. Inside, however, the carcass started to drift. This was because of Dreer's cadaver transforming into a foamy substance known as adpo-serratoire, is a brittle, waxy, water-insoluble material comprising generally of immerged unsaturated fats. Since Shaw had been working with 2 hands, he had to put his light down on the cavern floor. This light was associated with a weighty battery canister through a wire which is ordinarily worn on the jumper's midriff. Normally Shaw would have had the wire behind his neck, yet sadly, he didn't do so. When a jumper is in trouble, they will wave their light around to caution their jump allies that they need their assistance. So where Shirley plummeted 14 minutes after Shaw's flight, he was hoping to see a light blazing around to alarm him of Shaw's directions. However, as he swam endlessly further down, he just saw the pillar from the light in a stale position. No development. Something was off base. Certainly bird past what he had at first expected, around 800 FD beneath the surface level. As he kept on swimming further, he heard a boisterous break. His relaxing contraption had been broken. Shirley realized all he needed to do was siphon in more oxygen to the gas combination. Yet at that profundity, the oxygen would just endanger Shirley's life. He realized that he needed to get back to the surface. In spite of not knowing about Shaw's present status, he started to ascend to the surface. However, dropped from a helium bubble in his ear, he started to bounce all through cognizance, uncertain of what was up and what was down. Shirley was ultimately tracked down by a help jumper and was taken back to the surface. The rest of the group took care of his well-being, ensuring that he survived the ordeal. Yet the main thing at the forefront of Shirley's thoughts, where was Dave Shaw? 3 days after the mission, the plunge group returned submerged to recover the lost gear, and in doing so found Dean Dreer as well as Dave Shaw. While looking at Shaw's body, they accepted that the lines from the body pack became snared with the light, and Shaw's actual work to free himself prompted his demise. Shaw kicked the bucket, endeavoring to provide a sense of finality to a lamenting family who never knew whether they planned to see this kid's carcass again. Shah and Dean Dreer passed on doing